Hey guys, tonight we travel to the highlands of southern Africa, where ancient granite walls curl like sleeping snakes and dry grass rustles with the sound of forgotten stories. The moon is out, big, white, and very full, and under its gentle glow lies the vast, mysterious sight of Great Zimbabwe. You don't need to squint to see it. The stone rises naturally from the ground like it's always been part of the earth itself. The silence feels heavy but not threatening, more like expectant. You take a breath. The air smells of dry leaves, faint wood smoke, and dust baked into stone. There's no traffic noise, no hum of air conditioners, just crickets, the soft shuffle of your feet over worn paths, and a distant owl that sounds like it's been smoking for a century. And just so you know, yes, this place is magical. But no, you probably wouldn't survive it back when it was buzzing with trade, kings, and rivalries. Too many insects, too few snacks, and the etiquette around sacred enclosures? A little tricky. One wrong step and you might insult a spirit or 10. Still, we're here now. Safely, quietly, just guests. So, before you settle in and drift into this space, if you find yourself enjoying what you're hearing, take a moment to hit like and subscribe, but only if it truly feels worth it to you. Feel free to let me know your local time and where you're listening from down in the comments. I always love seeing how far our little nighttime caravan travels. Now, dim the lights a little, maybe turn on a fan for a soft ambient hum, and let's begin tonight's journey gently together. You stand at the edge of the ruins now. Your sandals scuff the dry grass, and your fingers twitch slightly with anticipation. You're not sure what you expected. Crumbling ruins? Maybe, but what you see in front of you is power. Still, after hundreds of years, the walls are smooth and silent. So smooth, in fact, they seem poured rather than stacked. But they weren't. No mortar holds them together, just clever placement. You run your hand over the granite blocks, cool even now, and as your fingers trace the curve of a rounded turret, you realize the stones fit together with a precision that feels more futuristic than ancient. Some of the blocks are the size of small goats, and yet they sit perfectly balanced. You half expect them to hum. Overhead, the stars are absurdly clear. One of them is blinking, or maybe that's just your tired eyes adjusting. Either way, the universe feels a bit closer here. Or maybe it's just the altitude. You're about 1,100 meters above sea level. There's no dramatic gate, no welcome to Great Zimbabwe neon sign. You simply enter, as if you were always meant to, and despite the open sky, you feel surrounded. Not trapped, but enclosed, like the ruins are wrapping around you, folding you into their secret. You hear something behind you. It's just the wind, or maybe a goat. Hard to tell. But that's part of the charm. Everything here feels just a little bit alive. Historians still argue whether the city's layout was meant to impress visitors, direct spiritual energy, or confuse nosy neighbors. Probably a bit of all three. And honestly, it works. The curves of the walls lead you forward, but not directly. There's no straight line, only gentle guidance. You walk slowly, careful not to kick any stones out of place, as if the city might grumble if disturbed. At your feet, there are shards of pottery half sunken into the dirt. Not museum pieces, just leftovers from a very old lunch. You spot a carved groove in a rock and wonder if it was meant for grinding grain, or some ritual you definitely weren't invited to. There's a tree nearby, an old one, gnarled and dramatic. Its roots crawl over the stones like lazy snakes. You pause under its canopy and look back at the path you've taken. It already feels distant. You're not even 10 minutes in, and time is bending a little. That happens here. And then you see it. Up ahead, rising gently from the hill, are the first layers of the famous hill complex. It doesn't scream for attention. It just is. Solid. Waiting. Watching. But that's for later. For now, you stand still and let the night do what it's meant to. Slow everything down. A breeze brushes past your cheek. The stones sigh, or maybe you do. It's hard to say anymore. The ruins aren't just old, they're tired in a dignified way. Like an elder who's seen too much but still hosts guests anyway. And lucky you, you're one of them tonight. You start the gentle climb toward the hill complex, the highest and oldest part of Great Zimbabwe. It's not Everest, but your thighs are mildly annoyed anyway. The path twists and narrows, winding between tumbled rocks and half-buried steps. Some are slick with moss. Others just seem to disappear under your feet. Either way, it's less of a stroll and more of a cautious negotiation with gravity. The higher you go, the more the air changes. Thinner, yes, but also stiller, as if even the wind hesitates to speak too loudly here. The trees start to thin, and the sky opens wide above you. It's navy blue smeared with stars. You pause halfway up and look back. From this height, the valley stretches out in layers of dark greens and grays, dotted with low shrubs and scatterings of thornbush. Below, the great enclosure waits, silent and dignified. But up here, this is where things happened. Or so they say. The hill complex isn't some grand palace with dramatic staircases or columns made for movie sets. It's more subtle than that. These were stone-built platforms, narrow passages, lookout points, and gathering areas that seem like they were designed for both ceremony and secrecy. You step between two narrow walls, barely shoulder-width apart, and suddenly you're funneled into a small, open space where moonlight pools like silver water. You get the sense that this exact spot was meant to make visitors feel small, or judged. Historians still argue whether this part of the city served as the spiritual hub, a royal residence, or both. Oral tradition leans toward it being sacred. Archaeologists found remains of homes, storage bins, and ceremonial artifacts, although it's all a bit interpretive. After all, a carved rock might be a royal seat or just a really nice rock. You step carefully into what looks like a large natural basin framed by stone. The acoustics change here. Your own breath sounds louder, more present. You say hello out loud just to test it, and instantly regret it. The sound bounces back, sharp and quick, like the city itself just shushed you. Somewhere nearby, something shifts. Not a footstep exactly, but more like a scrape. A tail? A spirit? A goat with secrets? You decide not to investigate. There's a low wall running along the ridge here. Some of the granite slabs are cracked, others perfectly aligned. Again, no mortar, just gravity and time and an absurd level of patience. You kneel down and notice something carved faintly into one of the stones. It's not clear, just a shallow groove in a spiral. Could be a symbol, could be graffiti, could be a bored teenager from 700 years ago. The mysteries stack up. You sit for a moment on one of the flattest rocks you can find. Not for rest, though your legs appreciate it, but because it feels appropriate. Like taking a pew in a centuries-old temple. There's no guide here, no rope barriers, just you, the wind, and a low hum that you're pretty sure isn't real but still very convincing. Down below, the fires of nearby villages flicker faintly. You remember that people still live here, not in the ruins but nearby around the modern town of Masvingo. Guides, elders, families who've passed down stories about this hill for generations. You wonder how many versions of this story exist. Probably dozens, maybe hundreds, and maybe every one of them is true in its own way. From up here, you start to understand why this place was so powerful. Not just militarily or politically, but spiritually. The view alone is commanding. You see the contours of the land, the places where the riverbed once ran, the old cattle enclosures, the trade routes fading into the horizon. Everything radiates outward from here like veins from a heart. You notice a large flat stone nearby, tilted, darkened at one edge, and worn smooth as though touched repeatedly over time. Some believe these stones were used in offerings. Some say this was the platform where rulers addressed the people below. Others suggest it was a sacred place for ancestral connection, where voices from the other side came through the rock like heat from coals. Of course, there's no proof of that, but as you place your palm on the stone, it does feel oddly warm, and you haven't seen sunlight hit it in over an hour. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe you're not the only visitor up here tonight. A soft wind brushes past you, cooler than before, and you feel the faintest ripple of goosebumps along your arm. Not from fear, just awareness. There's something comforting about this silence. It's not lonely, it's full. And you realize even without walls or monuments or golden masks, this place would still hold power. Because it was built with intention. Because it was chosen. Because for centuries, people walked these same stones, held the same questions, and sat, just like you, trying to understand. You rise, slowly, brushing the dust from your hands. One last glance at the horizon. One last listen for whatever might be listening back. Then, quietly, you begin the descent because there's more to see. You make your way down the stone path again, but this time your pace has slowed, not because your legs are sore, though they are, thanks for asking, but because something in you has shifted. There's a kind of reverence in the way your feet land now, more mindful, more respectful. You're not just a tourist wandering ruins anymore. You're a quiet intruder in a place still carrying memory in its stones. As you descend toward the lower terraces, you begin to notice little things. A curved stone wall that looks just slightly too perfect. A slope that feels designed like someone sculpted the earth itself to channel your footsteps. There's order here, even where it seems random. Then you hear it, a soft cluck. Then another. You round a corner and see them. Chickens. Dozens of them. Just casually clucking and fluffing around like they own the place. Which, to be fair, their ancestors might have. You squat quietly behind a rock and watch as one particularly self-important hen pecks at the dust, fluffs up dramatically, and settles herself on a small sun-warmed slab of stone like it's her personal throne. You may laugh, but here's the thing: chickens were sacred here. Seriously. Among the Shona people, chickens weren't just poultry. They were messengers. Offerings. Sometimes even oracles. You wouldn't just eat one unless it had been properly spoken to, thanked, and presented in ritual. And there's a legend that in the old days, only black-feathered roosters were acceptable for royal ceremonies. Anything less was an insult to the ancestors. So yes, sacred chickens. That happened. Just as you're thinking that's the weirdest thing you'll learn tonight, something flashes past your peripheral vision. A tail. You freeze, squinting into the underbrush. Was it a monkey? A mongoose? No, it's too big. Too smooth. You wait. And there it is again. A leopard. Or, more likely, a shadow pretending to be one. Still, your heart gives a small, unhelpful thump. Leopards were deeply tied to Great Zimbabwe's mythology. They were the spiritual messengers of the royal clan, linked to ancestral power, transformation, and protection. Rulers wore leopard skins. Priests invoked leopard spirits. And if one crossed your path, that meant something. Historians still argue whether leopards were physically kept in captivity here. Some say yes, pointing to carved figurines and leash-like depictions. Others think it's metaphor. But hey, if the local legends say leopards guarded the hilltop, who are we to disagree? You continue on cautiously, half-watching the shadows just in case they decide to pounce symbolically. The trees here are dense: acacia, mopane, baobabs with fat, dreaming trunks. Some of the bark is peeled in places. Ritual markings. Or maybe just bored goats. You approach a ring of stones that doesn't look like much at first. But on closer inspection, you realize it's a deliberately laid out circle, perhaps an altar. Or a gathering point. Or a chicken conference room, who knows. You feel the urge to sit, so you do. The dust is soft beneath you. The air smells faintly of wood ash and something floral, maybe wild basil crushed underfoot. Just as your eyes are beginning to relax into the twilight blur, a sound breaks the quiet. A whistle. Not sharp. Not musical. Just a faint, breathy note. You look around. Nothing. You remember suddenly what your guide said before you arrived: never whistle at night in Great Zimbabwe. It wasn't just a superstition, it was a belief rooted deep in local lore. Whistling was said to summon spirits. Not the friendly kind. Whistling in the dark was considered an invitation. A challenge. A calling. That's why even today, some elders will silence you sharply if you do it after sunset. Just in case. You hold your breath. Listen. Nothing else follows. Maybe it was the wind. Or maybe something just got invited. You decide not to hang around and find out. You rise slowly and walk on, this time sticking to the wider paths, the more open ground. Just in case something decides to accept your RSVP. The night has deepened. The stars have multiplied as if someone turned up the brightness on the sky. You begin to hear distant drums. Not loud. Just a thump-thump rhythm that could be a village ceremony or your heartbeat trying to convince itself this is fine. You pass a small stone outcrop where someone has left a bundle of dry herbs and a few smooth beads. A modern offering, likely. Locals still come here to ask for blessings, to give thanks, to connect. The line between past and present is blurrier than ever here. You press your fingers to one of the stones. It's warm again. You whisper a quiet apology just in case that whistle was yours. Then you keep walking, the cluck of sacred chickens echoing faintly behind you and the leopard spirit tail still teasing the edges of your imagination. You wake up the next morning, though wake up might be a stretch. It's more like you emerge from a drowsy stone trance. The sun has risen, slicing clean golden lines through the tree branches. Everything feels sharper, but also older, as if the city sighed sometime in the night and aged another century. You stretch, crack your knuckles, and glance up at the dry stone wall in front of you. It's still standing. Of course it is. It's been standing for roughly 700 years, and you spent the last 10 minutes trying to remember how. No mortar, no glue, no cement, just gravity, friction, and a level of stone-cutting precision that modern contractors should probably study on field trips. This is one of the things Great Zimbabwe is most famous for, its dry stone construction. Builders would chisel granite blocks from nearby hills, wait for them to naturally split along grain lines from the sun's heat, then carefully shape them into manageable sizes using iron tools. Then, like the world's most patient stonemasons, they stacked them without adhesive. The result? Walls that bend around hills, lean slightly inward, and curve like flowing fabric frozen in stone. You reach out and run your fingers along the seam of one of the blocks. The fit is perfect, so tight you couldn't even slip a sheet of parchment between them. If this were a puzzle, you'd accuse it of being rigged. Historians still argue over exactly how this technique was passed down, especially given the absence of blueprints or written manuals. Some think it was oral instruction, passed through apprentice stoneworkers. Others suggest a combination of ritual and craftsmanship, with each wall carrying not just structural knowledge, but spiritual meaning. And you're not just standing near one wall, you're surrounded by them. As you walk further, the walls curve gently around you, sometimes rising over 10 meters tall. They form corridors, loops, dead ends, and passageways so narrow you have to turn sideways. It's like wandering through a maze designed by someone who believed architecture should feel like poetry. And here's where it gets interesting. Many of the walls serve no obvious purpose. They don't support roofs. They don't always mark boundaries. They just exist, beautifully. Some scholars argue they were meant to awe, to guide visitors, to divide sacred from secular. Others think they were messages carved in negative space, codes written in stone, meant to be felt more than read. One wall in particular catches your attention. It's longer than most, over 200 meters, and gently zigzags across a grassy slope. This is the kind of feature that shows up in satellite images, the kind that archaeologists point to and say, "See, that right there? That's genius." You follow the line of it slowly, half hypnotized by its rhythm. At one bend, a small carved niche interrupts the pattern. Inside, there's a flat stone shaped vaguely like a platform. Maybe it once held a ritual object. Maybe it was someone's favorite sunbathing spot. Nobody knows. You sit on it anyway. The sun is warm now, almost hot. You squint at the granite and notice how the light brings out specks of quartz. The whole wall shimmers faintly, like it's remembering something. You lie back and stare at the sky, letting your fingertips brush against the stones beside you. Imagine stacking blocks all day in this heat, one by one, with nothing but rudimentary chisels and your grandfather yelling advice over your shoulder. The builders here didn't just make shelters. They made statements. And what's the biggest statement? That tower. The one you've heard about but haven't seen up close yet. The conical tower. You'll get there soon. But for now, you close your eyes and let the stone cradle you. It's cooler than the air around it. Still strong. Still here. And in that moment, you realize the real marvel isn't the height of the walls or the weight of the blocks. It's the quiet. The kind of silence that only comes from something finished. Not forgotten, just complete. Somewhere nearby, a lizard scurries across the path, kicking up a puff of red dust. A hawk circles above, casting a brief moving shadow across the courtyard. And in the distance, a child's laugh, modern, bright part of the world that still lives around this place. This isn't just an archaeological site. It's a neighborhood with a very, very old soul. And you're in it now, one smooth stone at a time. You finally reach it, the conical tower. And let's be honest, your first thought isn't exactly regal majesty. It's more like, that looks like a giant stone beehive. Which fair? It does. About 9 meters tall, smooth-sided, tapering slightly as it rises like an enormous granite popsicle standing quietly inside the great enclosure. You walk around it slowly, hand-brushing the stone surface. No carvings. No doors. No windows. Just stone. Silent, solid, slightly mysterious. So what was it? Historians still argue over that. Some say it was a grain bin, though a very dramatic one. Others think it was purely symbolic, a sign of royal power and fertility. There's even a theory that it represented a phallic emblem of kingship because apparently ancient rulers never missed a chance to turn architecture into a giant metaphor. You stand back and take in the rest of the great enclosure. This is the largest ancient structure south of the Sahara. A true feat of engineering. The outer wall stretches in a near-perfect ellipse over 250 meters around, up to 11 meters tall in places, and still very much standing despite earthquakes, time, and curious tourists leaning on it for centuries. Inside, the space feels both open and confusing. It's not a palace in the European sense. No throne room. No grand hall. But there are passageways, courtyards, small living areas, stone platforms that might have held huts or ceremonial objects. There's a rhythm to it, a quiet geometry, and there, tucked discreetly along the walls, you spot them. Soapstone birds. Not actual birds, of course. These are stone carvings. Stylized, abstract, big eyes, upright posture, sometimes perched on zigzag bases. 8 of these were found here, or fragments of them. They're some of the most famous artifacts in all of southern African history. If you've seen the Zimbabwean flag, you've seen one of them. You reach out to touch one, well, a replica. The real ones are kept safely in museums. This one stands near the entrance, proudly weathering wind and time. You admire the craftsmanship. It's smooth, balanced, expressive without being overly detailed. Nobody knows exactly what they meant. Some think the birds represent ancestors, messengers between the living and the spirit world. Others see them as totems of royal families, symbols of clan identity, or sacred emblems tied to rituals long since forgotten. One fringe theory even claimed they were some kind of alien communication system. Spoiler, they weren't. You find yourself oddly moved by the simplicity of the bird. No pomp, no glitter, just soapstone shaped with care and purpose. You walk slowly around the enclosure now, noticing how the architecture plays tricks with light. Some corridors narrow gradually, an optical illusion that makes distances feel longer. Others bend in ways that distort sound. Whisper at one end and it carries oddly well to the other. It's tempting to believe the whole structure was designed as an experience, not just a dwelling. A few flat stones on the ground seem out of place until you look closer. Grinding surfaces probably for food prep. You imagine someone kneeling there centuries ago, crushing grain for porridge, glancing up now and then at the tower, the birds, the layered stone rising all around them. It wasn't always quiet like this. At its peak, Great Zimbabwe was home to thousands. Maybe 10,000. Maybe more. That's another thing scholars bicker over. But the bones of domestic life still echo faintly here: food preparation areas, storage pits, traces of iron smelting. You even pass what looks like an ancient drain, cut stone leading water downhill, carefully designed for runoff. Because nothing ruins a kingdom like bad plumbing. A breeze rustles through the grasses just outside the walls and you step into the middle of the enclosure again. The tower looms nearby, still, watching. And now, with the morning sun catching the edges of the granite, you see something new. Not just a structure, but a message. Not a message to you. A message about someone. A people. A belief. A legacy in stone that doesn't need translation. You sit cross-legged in the dust, feeling small in the best possible way. Not insignificant. Just temporary. You won't be remembered for building massive towers from nothing but stone and math. But you are here to witness it. Which is something. Above you, a hawk rides the rising air, casting its shadow across the interior wall. For a brief moment, the tower, the bird, and you all align. A simple coincidence. Or maybe one of those unplanned rituals that this place seems to like so much. You smile. The soapstone birds weren't built to explain. They were built to endure. And they have. You're still inside the great enclosure, but something's shifted. You've passed the soapstone bird and the conical tower, and now the quiet feels different. Not eerie, just heavier, like the silence is waiting for you to pay attention to something else. You take a left down a passage that curls inward, a little too tight for comfort. The walls press in rounded, smooth, and higher than your head. It's like walking through a stone throat. Each step echoes. Your breath bounces back at you. You whisper hello and the walls murmur it right back. Twice. With attitude. You're not imagining it, this place has incredible acoustics. The way the stone is laid, the thickness of the walls, the curvature of the pathways, all of it manipulates sound in ways that would make a modern architect pause. Some scholars think it was designed for ceremonies so that chants and drumbeats would amplify and travel. Others think it was just a lucky side effect. But one fringe theory? The builders did it on purpose to carry voices, maybe even messages to the ancestors themselves. You decide not to test that theory too loudly. You emerge into a wider courtyard space and almost trip over a half-buried platform. At first glance, it looks like a dance stage, or maybe a seating area. But the truth is, no one really knows. That's kind of a theme here. Historians still argue whether the interior structures were mostly residential or sacred. Some point to post holes in hearths, evidence of huts and kitchens. Others see these platforms as stages for ritual, debate, or ceremony. You wonder if someone once stood right here and told stories so powerful the walls still remember the rhythm of their voice. You sit down. The stone beneath you is cool but not cold. And as your fingers trace the edges of a worn pattern, spirals and lines barely visible, you realize how many layers of life this place must have held. Because this wasn't just stone and birds and towers. It was lived in. You imagine it now, a woman stirring porridge over a clay fire pit. Children chasing chickens past the narrow corridors. Elders sitting beneath the tower, grinding tobacco leaves and exchanging gossip that would eventually become oral history. Goats bleating. Someone braiding someone else's hair. Someone complaining about sore knees. Someone probably getting annoyed that the tower blocks their sunlight. Life. You wander toward the far side of the enclosure where you see a patch of earth darker than the rest. Charcoal black. You kneel and brush it gently. Burned wood still embedded in the ground. Centuries old. A hearth. You close your eyes and for a moment smell smoke. Not real smoke, just memory smoke. The kind your brain invents when it realizes it's standing somewhere that used to matter. You rise and glance toward the low wall beyond the tower. It overlooks the outer plains stretching all the way to the modern roads in the distance. Somewhere out there, tourists are probably trying to find the visitor center and arguing about which bottled water is coldest. But here the world hasn't moved. It still listens the way it always did. A breeze picks up gentle but certain. The grass in the open spaces begins to rustle and you catch the faint, metallic tap of something against stone. You follow the sound and find a small iron tool, half buried. A chisel? A knife? Hard to tell. But it reminds you stone wasn't the only story here. Great Zimbabwe was also a place of industry. Iron smelting was practiced nearby. Tools, weapons, even jewelry were crafted with care. Traces of smelting furnaces have been found outside the enclosure, charcoal piles, slag remains, even tuyères, which are basically the ancient version of blast nozzles. And it wasn't just metal. Gold. Great Zimbabwe sat on the edge of gold-rich lands, and trade routes reached all the way to the Swahili coast. From there, goods traveled by dhow to Arabia, Persia, even China. Persian glass beads have been found here. Chinese porcelain. Arabic coins. These stones were the backdrop to a city humming with commerce and contact. You think of it like a medieval group chat with way better craftsmanship. You spot a half-buried shard of pottery and turn it over in your hand. It's rough, hand-shaped with a delicate ridge along the edge. Probably not fancy. Probably not ceremonial. Just someone's everyday bowl, which somehow makes it even more beautiful. You place it back in the dust where you found it. Another gust of wind swirls around the tower, catching the grass in little spirals. You wonder what the birds thought of all this, real ones, not the soapstone ones. They would have seen the city grow. Seen its peak. Seen its slow decline. And maybe if birds were the messengers people believed they were, they carried the memory of all this away, scattered it on the wind. Maybe that's why standing here feels like remembering something you never lived. You give the tower one last glance before slipping through a narrow exit passage, ducking slightly as the stone closes around you again. It's time to find the trade trails. But part of you wants to stay right here, where the stones almost hum and the birds once watched. You slip out of the great enclosure through a tight corridor, its walls gently pressing inward like a stone hallway with stage fright. You duck, shuffle sideways, and emerge, blinking, into open space. The sun hits you full on. It's late morning now. Warm, bright, and startlingly quiet, aside from the occasional goat bleating somewhere in the distance. Honestly, that goat might be following you. Ahead, you see it. The dry, grassy slope leading toward the conical tower's sister structure. Not another tower exactly, but something equally strange, a smaller, enclosed platform ringed with stones, and at its heart, a strange cone-shaped mound. You step closer, thinking, well, this is either a miniature volcano or a very confident design choice. You've heard the theories. Some say it's a granary, a royal silo to store surplus millet or sorghum, a symbol of wealth and stability. That's the practical view. But there's also the symbolic camp, those who say the conical form represents male virility. Power. Longevity. You squint at it and think, maybe it's both? After all, grain is kind of power. Try running a kingdom on an empty stomach. Historians still argue whether this part of the site was for ceremony, storage, or, let's say, symbolic enthusiasm. And in fairness, the tower does look like it's trying to prove a point. It's tall, smooth, and let's be honest, uncomfortably suggestive in its geometry. You walk slowly around the base. No door. No sign of entry. Just stone rising out of the ground in a spiral of mystery. Then you notice something stranger. The wall around this structure isn't just functional. It plays with you. It bends, turns, wraps, narrows suddenly in parts, widens in others. It's as if the very space is guiding your movement without ever touching you. You test it. Try walking it with your eyes closed. You bump your elbow almost immediately. Okay, so maybe not that intuitive. You start to notice how shadow behaves differently here. Some walls cast short, tight silhouettes. Others throw long, dramatic arcs across the grass as though the enclosure wants to tell time. You remember that in many African cultures, space isn't just background, it's intentional. Every curve means something. Every wall holds a memory. And these walls? They're whispering. You follow a narrow corridor that leads nowhere in particular, just a loop. A circle inside a square. Was it meant to confuse visitors? To create a sacred path? Or just give the chickens something fun to navigate? No one knows. You reach a small alcove where a cluster of rounded stones sits like forgotten stools. You take a seat and look up at the inner curve of the outer wall. It's elegant. You didn't expect that. Not from granite anyway. But it feels graceful. Measured. You imagine the stonemasons who built it, hands dusty, knees aching, still adjusting each block until the line flowed just right. You suspect they didn't use blueprints. They didn't need to. They had rhythm. And rhythm builds walls too. A soft sound pulls your attention sideways, drumming. Faint. Distant. Maybe a rehearsal for a ceremony in one of the nearby villages. Maybe someone just tapping a cooking pot rhythmically. But the sound drifts over the wall like it belongs here. You think back to how this city functioned not just as a fortress or royal residence, but as a performance space. A spiritual engine. A stage. And suddenly the curves, towers, and sound-amplifying walls make more sense. You walk again. Another passage. Another view. And now you're standing in a place where light hits at a perfect angle. The grass shimmers. The stones glow faintly gold. And in the middle of it all, yes, again, the tower rises, not with grandeur, but with quiet confidence. You sit down on a ledge and exhale. This city wasn't made to explain itself. It wasn't built for foreign eyes. It was constructed by people who didn't need to justify meaning with labels or signs. They just lived it, layer by layer, stone by stone. You pick up a small pebble near your foot, smooth, flat, warm. Not part of the structure, but part of the place. You roll it between your fingers. Maybe the tower wasn't meant to store grain or represent power. Maybe it was a signal. Not to gods or kings, but to the future. To say, we were here. We built this. We mattered. A gust of wind curls through the enclosure, lifting dust in soft spirals. You watch it rise, then fall again, settling into the grooves of the stone like powdered memory. Then you rise, dust yourself off, and start walking again. There are still trade routes to trace and stories waiting in the soil. You follow a winding path away from the enclosure, the tower retreating behind you like a watchful eye that doesn't quite blink. The air smells different now, drier, sharper, like you've stepped out of memory and into motion. Ahead, the landscape flattens slightly, opening into a gentle plain studded with termite mounds and small shrubs. You spot a cluster of stones arranged in a strange, purposeful pattern. Not walls this time, as something else. The outline of ancient huts. Barely visible, just enough to whisper, people lived here. And not just any people. Traders. You're now walking through what used to be part of Great Zimbabwe's economic engine, an outer residential area peppered with signs of craftsmanship, exchange, and storage. No towering conical monuments here, but this was where things happened. Where goods were made, stored, bartered, and sometimes accidentally dropped under a mat and rediscovered 700 years later by very confused archaeologists. You crouch beside one of the circular foundations. A scattering of ash. A tiny shard of pottery with a black zigzag pattern. And hello, what's this? A glass bead. Blue. Tiny. Faintly translucent. and definitely not made anywhere near here. This is Persian glass, probably from Shiraz or the Gulf Coast, traded along the Swahili routes up through Kilwa or Sofala, then carried overland by donkey, caravan, or the foot of someone with very impressive calves. You roll it between your fingers. It's almost weightless. A miniature traveler. Historians still argue how far these trade routes truly extended, but the evidence? It's here. Beads from Persia, porcelain from China, coins from Arabia, even fragments of cloth that might have come from India. And not just one or two items dropped by a wayward sailor, whole caches of them, suggesting steady, sustained trade. Great Zimbabwe wasn't isolated. It was plugged in. You walk a little further and notice the remains of a smelting pit, charred earth, fragments of slag, and a circle of blackened stone. This is where iron was worked, where tools were shaped, where spears, chisels, and arrowheads were born in fire. You pick up a small piece of slag and marvel at how light it is. Like volcanic popcorn. But this stuff meant power. Control over metal meant control over tools, farming, and warfare. Nearby, you find the faint imprint of what used to be a kiln. Clay bricks once fired in it were used for pots, tiles, maybe even to reinforce stonework. It wasn't just brawn that built this city. It was science, engineering, chemistry delivered with a side of chicken feathers and ancestor rituals. A few paces away, you find another platform, low and circular. It might have been a market stall. Imagine it now, baskets full of salt, dried fish, cowrie shells, goat hides, herbs, and yes, gold dust. Because gold is why people came here. There were gold mines in the hills to the west. Shallow, yes, but rich. Local diggers would scrape it from the ground using basic tools, then pan it in rivers or sift it through animal hide sieves. It was then weighed, often with seeds or iron bits, and traded. Not as coins, but as raw material. Traded for what? Luxury goods. Status symbols. Story fodder. And no, there was no central mint. No IRS. Just trust, repetition, and probably a very scary uncle who made sure no one cheated on the weight. You sit under a mopane tree and imagine the movement. Traders unloading goods, debating prices, grinding spices, arguing about camel routes. Children darting between stalls. Smoke rising from cooking fires. Someone trying to sell you a limited edition pot with decorative dents. This wasn't just an economic center. It was a cultural crossroads. Stories from the Swahili coast met rumors from the African interior. Pilgrims bumped shoulders with merchants. And somewhere in the middle, someone accidentally dropped a bead that you'd later find and roll between your fingers. A light breeze pushes through the grass, making it shimmer. You close your eyes and imagine the sound of a dhow sail snapping tight. Even though the sea is hundreds of kilometers away, the connection to the Indian Ocean is real. It's in the artifacts, the architecture, and the fact that someone, at some point, told a story here that traveled farther than they ever did. Your guide once said that every stone here heard a different language. Shona, Arabic, Swahili, Gujarati, maybe even early Portuguese. Words layered like sediment, some forgotten, others still pulsing through the dust. You rise and stretch, the glass bead still in your hand. You place it back where you found it. Carefully, gently, like tucking someone back into bed. Then you stand quietly for a moment, because it's not just stone that holds memory. Sometimes it's glass. You walk slowly now, half from the heat, half because the ground has begun to whisper again. Not in words exactly, but with every step, there's that low, shifting rustle of dry grass over loose stones, as if the earth is trying to get your attention. And sure enough, just ahead, the ground dips into a shallow basin where small pieces of broken pottery litter the dirt like confetti from a 700-year-old party. This isn't a random scatter. It's a midden, basically a medieval trash heap, which sounds gross, but in the archaeological world, it's a jackpot. You crouch and pick up a piece. It's curved, pale red, with traces of soot. A cooking pot, most likely. Not fancy, just everyday. And somehow that makes it feel more real than all the conical towers and carved birds combined. Because here's the thing, people lived here. Not just kings and priests, but families. People who spilled stew, who dropped beads, who argued over dinner and probably tripped over chickens in the dark. Historians still argue whether Great Zimbabwe society was rigidly hierarchical or more fluid than we assume. Some believe it had a centralized monarchy with elite classes living in the hilltop areas and the common folk down below. Others think it was more community-based, with shared responsibilities and status shifting with wealth, trade, or ritual prestige. What's clear, though, is that there was movement of people, goods, and ideas. And it didn't stop at Africa's edge. You find a coin, or what used to be one. It's barely legible, oxidized into a greenish oval. But someone's initials are still faintly there. Arabic script curved like waves, possibly from Kilwa, maybe Oman. Someone once held this, maybe traded it for cloth, or a camel, or a favor. You keep walking and stumble into a clearing dotted with low, circular outlines, collapsed huts. Dozens of them. You picture it, a neighborhood. Smoke from fires rising gently, laughter drifting through thin reed walls. A drumbeat echoing lazily across the valley. Not everything here was ceremonial. A lot of it was just living. You pass the remains of what may have been a cattle kraal. Rounded walls now melted into mounds. Cattle were wealth here, and their care was more than economic. In many Bantu-speaking cultures, cattle were deeply spiritual. Offerings, ancestors, even status barometers. Your livestock said more about you than your Instagram profile ever could. Next to the kraal, you notice a flat stone slab with circular depressions, like someone started carving a checkerboard and gave up halfway. But this was a grain grinder. The grooves were made by centuries of use, where women sat cross-legged with oval stones, grinding millet and sorghum into flour. You press your palm into one of the dips. It's smooth, cool, and deep enough to cradle your fingers. You hear birds now, real ones, not soapstone. A small flock of hornbills screeches from a tree overhead, sounding deeply offended by your presence. You nod in apology and move on. Soon, you come to what looks like a ceremonial pathway, slightly raised, flanked by low stone walls that guide you toward something. You follow it. At the end is a lone tree, tall, twisted, possibly hundreds of years old. Locals call it the listening tree. Some say the elders used to gather here to tell stories. Others believe it was a place for offerings, where leaves whispered answers to the living from the dead. You sit beneath it. It's cooler here. The bark is rough, gnarled, and shaped like a spine. A small bundle of herbs rests at its base, wrapped in faded cloth. Clearly someone was here recently. You reach into your pocket and find a small piece of quartz you picked up earlier. You didn't mean to keep it, but it's here. You place it gently at the base of the tree next to the bundle, just in case this place still listens. The ground around you is quiet. No goats, no wind, just the stillness of a place with nothing left to prove. And you realize the stories of Great Zimbabwe weren't just written in stone. They were etched into pottery, embedded in trade routes, whispered through trees, and passed on in the daily rhythm of people simply living their lives. Not epic battles, not coronations, just mornings, meals, markets, moments. And that's what made this place matter. You rise, brush the dust from your hands, and take one last look around. You're standing where a neighborhood used to breathe, and in the quiet it still kind of does. It's late afternoon now. The sun hangs lower, casting long shadows that stretch across the valley like slow-moving fingers. You make your way along a low ridge just beyond the main enclosure, a place where the stones start thinning out, where grass overtakes ruins, and where memory begins to dissolve into mystery. You're following a barely visible path, not the kind made by archaeologists or tourists, but something older. A trade trail. Faint, narrow, stubborn, like it's been walked by so many feet that the earth itself has learned the way. This was part of the route that connected Great Zimbabwe to the outside world, though route is generous. It was more like a living, breathing artery twisting through forests, hills, and rivers, carrying gold, ivory, salt, stories, and the occasional extremely tired donkey. You pause beside a scattering of broken shells, not snail shells, but cowries. Small, curved, white with a slit on one side. Once used as currency, once carried by traders from the Indian Ocean coast. These little shells traveled over 500 kilometers to get here, which means someone brought them, by hand, possibly barefoot. Historians still argue whether Great Zimbabwe sent its own caravans out or simply acted as a central hub, but the evidence of its trade is undeniable. Chinese celadon bowls, Indian cotton, Persian beads, even glass bangles, because yes, people here like their accessories. You spot a glint in the dust and bend down. A tiny green fragment, probably a piece of one of those bangles. Probably dropped by someone who tripped while walking and then swore in a language you'll never know. You walk on. The trail leads you to the edge of a shallow ravine where you see the outline of what used to be a seasonal stream. Dry now. Just pebbles and faded reeds. But you can picture it full, babbling, glittering, a source of life. Nearby, you find traces of what looks like a rest stop. No snack bar, no bathrooms, but there's a circle of stones blackened by old fire. A pit for warmth or cooking. Perhaps this was where traders rested, shared stories, took off their sandals and cursed their aching feet. You sit on one of the stones. The landscape in front of you stretches far. Low hills, scattered trees, a haze of dust kicked up by wind, and yep, there's that goat again. Possibly following you. Possibly a ghost goat. The horizon here feels different. It's not an ending. It's a direction. You think of the people who walked the same trail with nothing but a satchel, a hope for fair trade, and maybe a carved soapstone charm tucked into their robes. Traders weren't just businessmen, they were messengers, connectors, translators. They brought more than goods. They carried information, songs, fashion trends, and probably a lot of gossip. Imagine being one of them. You reach a crossroads, literally. Two faint paths diverge. One bends west toward the Limpopo River, the other east toward the Swahili coast. You close your eyes and try to picture both. The western path would lead you toward cattle herders, salt mines, and rumors of rain-bringing ancestors. The eastern one? Toward Dow ports, Islamic scholars, and coralstone cities where minarets rose beside banana trees. And Great Zimbabwe sat right in the middle of it all. Not isolated, not peripheral, but central to trade, power, identity. You think of how maps once erased it. You remember the dusty European atlases where southern Africa was labeled unknown interior, where Great Zimbabwe was either a blank spot or a fantasy scribble. Early European explorers couldn't believe Africans had built this. They assumed it had to be Phoenicians or Arabs or stray Egyptians on vacation. And for decades, even after the ruins were discovered, colonial archaeologists bent over backwards to explain them away. They stripped artifacts, misattributed the work, dismissed oral histories. Because sometimes it's easier to reshape the truth than to admit your assumptions were wrong. But the trail is still here. So are the stones. So are the descendants. You look down the path again and think of the thousands of quiet footsteps that passed through this same space. Not conquerors. Not kings. Just people. With worn sandals. Surbacks. And stories so old they forgot where they began. You stand and dust off your hands. The shadows are longer now. The sun's starting its golden descent, turning the granite walls in the distance the color of old honey. The wind picks up. A dry, papery sound that feels like it's made of wings and whispering names. The trail continues east, but you turn back toward the ruins. It's time to return, not to the tower, not to the throne, but to the small spaces where people once boiled porridge, traded stories, and stared at stars the same way you're about to. Because Great Zimbabwe wasn't just about monuments. It was about movement. And you're part of that now. By the time you return to the ruins, the light has changed again. It's not quite evening, not yet. But the sun is low enough to gild the tops of the walls in soft amber. You walk more slowly now. Not because you're tired, though your calves have strong opinions, but because something about the stones feels different in this light. Softer, warmer, less like ruins and more like resting elders. You pass back through the outer ring of dry stone walling, weaving between rounded corridors that now cast long, crescent-shaped shadows. And just ahead, in the middle of a slightly sloped courtyard, you see it. A shallow pit surrounded by crates, measuring tapes, and little white labels fluttering in the breeze. Archaeology, the kind with boots, notebooks, and cautious fingers. But this isn't some ancient scene. It's modern, active. A new team, probably from a local university, gently brushing at layers of soil like they're coaxing secrets out of the earth. A student waves politely as you pass. You wave back, quietly relieved they're not holding a trowel like a sword. You pause and peer into the pit. Inside, small shards of decorated pottery, a rusted iron blade, and a tiny carved bead, blue again, maybe Persian, maybe Indian, maybe local. It's impossible to tell without lab analysis, which you definitely do not have access to. But it makes you smile. The city still has things to share. You remember reading about the first archaeologists to study this site. And by study, you mean storm in with pickaxes and assumptions. The late 19th century was not a golden era of respectful discovery. The most infamous figure? James Theodore Bent, a British explorer who showed up in the 1890s, looked at the ruins and promptly decided, definitely not African. No evidence, no hesitation, just Victorian certainty. He and his wife Mabel spent months here, excavating, which often meant removing artifacts without documentation, mislabeling finds, and selectively interpreting local legends to fit their theory that the ruins were built by Queen Sheba's people, or Phoenicians, or pretty much anyone but the local Shona. It was, to put it gently, a mess. Historians still argue whether Bent was malicious or just a product of his time. But what's clear is this: his theory stuck. For decades, you pass a partially reconstructed wall, tidy, but a bit too tidy. A lot of early efforts to restore Great Zimbabwe involved guessing. Walls were rebuilt with modern mortar. Paths were shifted. One restoration team even tried to cap a stone wall with concrete. Concrete, on a 700-year-old monument. It did not go well. The problem wasn't just the damage done to the site. It was the erasure. For much of the 20th century, textbooks and museum displays continued to attribute Great Zimbabwe to foreign builders. European explorers simply couldn't reconcile the scale, precision, and design with their image of pre-colonial Africa. Which is wild, considering oral histories in the region had been saying all along that it was the work of local ancestors. The Shona people never claimed mystery. They claimed memory. You walk on, reaching the edge of the hill complex again, where an informational plaque, recent, clean, respectful, now tells the corrected story. A small paragraph explains the colonial myths. Another outlines the archaeological findings. A third simply states, this was a city built by Africans, for Africans, and it endured. You take a deep breath, because this isn't just about who laid the stones. It's about who was believed. And for too long, the people most connected to this place were the ones least listened to. The wind picks up, a dry, swirling gust that tugs gently at your sleeves, like a reminder to keep walking. You pass the stone steps again, each one worn into a slight dip at the center, proof of centuries of feet. You place yours in the groove and feel it hold. You wonder what it was like in the 1970s, when Zimbabwe's liberation movement began to claim Great Zimbabwe as a national symbol. When schoolchildren learned to say the name with pride. When the bird was chosen as the national emblem, and suddenly, a carved soapstone relic became a rallying cry. You look back at the hill, still watching, still proud. The name Zimbabwe itself is debated. Some believe it comes from Zimbabwe, houses of stone. Others argue it was a title of respect, Zimbabwe, meaning venerated houses. Either way, the name fits, and eventually the entire country chose it. You turn toward the horizon, now bleeding orange and soft pink. And for the first time, it feels like the past is not something under your feet. It's something holding you up. This place doesn't need to prove itself anymore, and neither do the people who built it. The sun is slipping toward the horizon now, its final descent slow, syrupy, and golden. You find yourself walking again, not toward any monument or map point, but into a quiet slope lined with grass and brush. The path doesn't feel official. It feels familiar, like it formed because enough people needed it. You come across a clearing where the grass has been pressed down in a large oval. Not recently, maybe last season, but still visible. The earth remembers patterns. A village gathering, perhaps, or a seasonal market. You sit for a moment just to see what the ground has to say, and it tells you nothing, which is honestly kind of perfect, because not everything here needs to explain itself. Some things are just meant to be felt. You rise and continue forward, eventually reaching a low stone platform barely knee-high, shaped like a bench without a back. On it, there's a carved post hole smoothed from time. This is one of the few hints of architecture that once included wood huts, roofs, shade structures long since vanished. You sit again, because everything in this place invites you to sit, to listen, to remember what you didn't even know you'd forgotten. The breeze brushes your cheeks, lifting a small spiral of red dust, and you start to wonder about the people who left this place. Because yes, at some point, Great Zimbabwe was abandoned. Not violently, not in a single event. It just emptied out. Historians still argue whether it was due to drought, deforestation, overgrazing, political shifts, or trade routes moving elsewhere. Some say the city simply grew too big for its resources. Others suggest rival centers emerged, drawing people away. There are even oral traditions that mention sacred signs, omens that told the elders it was time to move on. Whatever the reason, by the 15th century, the city was largely quiet. The towers still stood, the birds still perched, but the voices were fewer. The fires burned lower. Eventually, the doorways stayed shut. But, and here's the beautiful part, the culture didn't die. It migrated. The Shona people didn't vanish. They spread. Their language, customs, architecture, and belief systems flowed into the surrounding regions. They founded new communities. They carried the memory of the city in song, in stories, in stonework patterns that showed up hundreds of kilometers away. You think of it like a seed. Sometimes when a tree grows too large for its roots, the wind carries its seeds to new ground, and the forest expands unseen. In the clearing ahead, you notice something. A cluster of children's footprints in dried mud. Modern ones. Tiny sneakers. You follow them to the edge of a low ledge where someone's arranged small stones in a line. A child's game, maybe? Or an offering? Or both? Great Zimbabwe isn't a museum. It's not frozen in glass or laminated in time. It's alive. People visit. Kids play. Elders still speak the stories aloud. Some guides can trace their families back generations, living memory tangled in ruins. You walk farther and hear the sound of laughter. Down the slope, a few local boys are herding goats. The goats are, as always, deeply unbothered by your presence. One of them gives you a look that says, "You again?" You wave. The boys wave back. One of them points to a tall tree with broad leaves, mimics someone climbing it, and grins. A lookout tree. Or a fruit tree. Or just a good tree for being 8 years old with time to kill. You walk on, back toward the heart of the site. As you pass the walls again, they feel different now. Less like ruins. More like ribs protecting something vital. And sure enough, at the center of one spiral corridor, you find a woman kneeling beside a cloth mat, laying out small trinkets. Handmade soapstone birds. Miniature towers. Even carved keychains shaped like walls. You stop. She nods. You ask her gently if the birds mean anything to her. She shrugs with a smile, then says they always watched. They still do. That feels right. You buy one of the birds and hold it in your palm. It's not perfect. Slightly lopsided. The wings are uneven. But it's smooth, heavy, and made by hands that understand this place in a way no textbook can. You thank her. Then turn back toward the hill. The sun is almost gone now, tucked just behind the crest, casting long golden shadows that reach out like arms trying to hold the day in place a little longer. And you think, abandonment isn't the same as disappearance. Sometimes leaving is a kind of becoming. And Great Zimbabwe never really left. It simply grew wider than the stones could hold. You wake early the next morning. Not because of an alarm, there's no need for that here, but because the world nudges you. Light seeps through the edges of your eyelids, golden and slow, like a yawn that's turned into color. You sit up, wrapped in a scratchy woven blanket that smells faintly of dust, smoke, and aloe leaves. Outside, the grass is still damp from the cool night air, and the horizon is just beginning to glow. The ruins are silent again. Not abandoned. Just listening. You walk barefoot this time. The earth is soft beneath you, still holding a bit of the night's chill. You head toward the hill complex, your steps now practiced, your body remembering the rhythm of this place. You pause near a low stone wall, one you've passed many times now. Today, it feels different. You place your hand on it without really thinking, like you're greeting someone. This morning, you're not looking for towers or beads or theories. You're looking for signs of everyday life. And they're everywhere. There, near a weathered stone ring, another hut foundation, you find a pile of river-worn stones, smooth, oval, speckled. They weren't used in construction. They were likely cooking stones, heated in fire, then dropped into water pots to boil the contents. A forgotten microwave. You picture someone impatiently poking one with a stick to see if it's hot enough to cook millet. A few meters away, something even smaller, a woven fragment barely the size of a matchbox, half buried in the soil. Dried grass or reed, possibly part of a sleeping mat. You brush it lightly and leave it where it is. Some things don't want to be taken. Some things just want to be noticed. You wander through the living spaces where history books tend to gloss over. But here, life left deeper marks than any ceremony. You can almost hear it. Children giggling, a clay pot cracking in the fire, the slap of wet laundry against stone. People lived here fully, not just between rituals and walls, but in the tiny, forgettable moments that never make it into museums. You come to a flat stretch of ground and you pause. It looks like nothing. Just hard-packed dirt. But then you notice a ring of tiny holes almost perfectly circular. A game board. Sorrow. Played with pebbles. Like Mancala but Zimbabwean. This wasn't an artifact, it was an afternoon. You crouch, pick up a few stones, and try to imagine the rules. Someone probably cheated here. Someone probably won too often. Someone definitely stormed off once, swearing they'd never play again. Historians still argue whether these details matter. They focus on trade routes, kings, measurements, and metallurgy. But the truth is, these quiet things, the games, the fire pits, the burnt crust at the bottom of a pot, are what held the city together. They were the glue, the heartbeat. As you stand, your eye catches something else, a wooden post set into the earth. New, maybe for fencing. But behind it, carved into the stone wall, is a small groove just the edge of a spiral. Not decorative. Maybe a tool mark. Or maybe something someone scratched in as they waited for dinner. Nearby, a woman appears carrying a bundle of reeds on her back. She nods politely as she passes, her sandals scuffing the dust. You nod back. You notice her shadow stretches long along the base of a wall, and for a moment it overlaps the shape of a similar figure carved into the stone. Not real, just erosion and coincidence. But it stops you cold. For a second, the past and present hold hands. You walk slowly again, finding a shaded corner where someone has left a small clay dish full of marula nuts and dry petals. An offering? A quiet gesture? Or just lunch left behind? It doesn't matter. It's perfect. Because this place isn't frozen in time. It never was. It breathes. It grows. It adapts. The elders tell stories here. Schoolchildren take field trips here. Goats wander through like it's their birthright. And honestly, maybe it is. You sit beneath a tree that's older than the country, watching the wind play with a strand of grass caught in a crack between stones. And you realize nothing here is loud. Not the architecture. Not the legacy. Not even the resistance to erasure. It's all quiet. But it never stopped speaking. You lie back in the grass. Let the sun warm your face. Let the whispers hum again. You've been walking through stone this whole time, but it's the softness that stays with you. The afternoon stretches on, warmer now, the air growing heavy with the scent of dry earth and something faintly floral. Perhaps wild basil, or that mysterious bush with the purple flowers you've passed 3 times now without properly identifying. You follow the curve of a narrow trail past a low terrace and catch sight of a few thatched rooftops in the distance. Not ancient huts, but modern homes, belonging to the local community that still lives around the ruins. That's something the brochures don't always mention. Great Zimbabwe isn't just a monument. It's a neighbor. You wander closer, guided more by instinct than any signpost. The stone walls eventually give way to open space, and you find yourself at the edge of a small cluster of homes. One of the walls has a large painted bird on it. Stylized, colorful, unmistakably referencing the soapstone birds of the ruins. Below it, someone has written in large, careful lettering, Tinaziva Tirivana Vevu. We know we are children of the soil. A boy is drawing shapes in the dust with a stick. His sister watches, arms crossed, clearly judging his artistic technique. When they notice you, she smiles first, then points to your notebook. Are you writing a book? You say, sort of. She nods, unimpressed. There's a better story tree over there, she says, gesturing toward a shady acacia. That's where my grandfather tells the good ones. And just like that, you're walking again. You reach the tree and sit in its shade. The bark is pale and peeling, the branches home to 1,000 sleepy insects. On the ground nearby are bottle caps, a few chicken feathers, and the faintest outline of a worn footpath. Life still pulses through this place, and its pulse has a beat you can't find in textbooks. A man appears soon after, barefoot, sun-wrinkled, with a calmness that seems older than the ruins themselves. He nods a greeting and settles on a nearby rock. You've been walking, he says. You nod. He gestures broadly toward the hills. All that? That was our grandfather's city. The one with no king now, but still many voices. You listen as he speaks. Not a history lesson, but a story. Not facts, but feelings. About the old ones who taught with riddles, about stone walls that listened, and dreams that told people when to move. He speaks of the moon as a messenger and of owls as serious but not unfriendly. He pauses often, not for dramatic effect, but because his thoughts arrive slowly, as if they're traveling from a very distant place. Did you see the birds? He asks eventually. You nod. They weren't meant to be solved. he says, only respected. Historians still argue whether oral tradition should carry the same weight as written record. But sitting here, with this man telling stories under a tree that may have grown from the ashes of another long gone, the answer feels obvious. You ask him if he ever walks inside the great enclosure. He smiles. Sometimes. But the walls don't always speak to everyone. You have to be quiet enough. You sit in silence together after that. The sun filters through the branches, turning patches of dirt into shifting patterns of light and shadow. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks half-heartedly at something only it can see. A plastic bag rustles against a bush. Life, as usual, continues without fanfare. Eventually, the man stands. If the place remembers you, he says, you'll dream of it. That's how you know it's not done with you. And just like that, he walks away, slowly, deliberately, without looking back. You remain under the tree a while longer. The kids from earlier return, now armed with more sticks and considerably more competitive energy. They begin to dig a shallow circle in the dirt, clearly preparing a game. They invite you to join, but you decline with a smile. You're not ready to leave this quiet yet. You look up toward the hills. The ruins are just visible beyond the trees, half hidden, half watching. Not dramatic, not lit by spotlights, but alive. Always. You rise and begin to walk back toward the stones, this time not as a visitor, but as someone who's been remembered. You're back at the base of the hill complex now, the late sun catching on the stones like they've been dipped in bronze. You've circled the city more than once, but this return feels different. The dust on your shoes is no longer foreign. The air isn't just warm, it's familiar. You pause at the path that leads upward, the same narrow, curving route you climbed earlier, but this time you don't ascend. Instead, you find yourself drifting left, toward a shaded grove where a few baobab trees loom like sentinels from another time. One of them is massive. Its bark is rough, pocked with old carvings, some modern graffiti, some older. You trace one with your fingers. A geometric pattern. 3 triangles stacked like a broken crown. Historians still argue whether these markings were clan symbols, ritual maps, or simply the equivalent of a teenager etching their crush's initials with a rock. But the grooves are deep, old, and they tell you one thing for sure. Someone once stood here, thinking they mattered enough to leave a mark. You sit beneath the baobab's wide arms. A breeze lifts your hair and sets a rhythm in the leaves. And that's when you hear it. Music. Faint at first, then stronger. Not recorded. Not piped from speakers. Real. You follow the sound. It leads you to an open clearing just beyond a small stream. A seasonal one, mostly dry now, but soft underfoot. There, under a thorn tree, 3 young men are playing bira thumb pianos. The melody is delicate, metallic, repetitive, like a lullaby told by raindrops. One of them hums along. Another taps a soft rhythm on a dried gourd. They nod when you approach but don't stop playing. You sit quietly, cross-legged in the grass, and let the sound soak in. It doesn't feel like performance. It feels like memory, like the sound belongs to the stones as much as to the hands that pluck it. The bira has been part of Shona culture for centuries. More than just music, it's prayer, story, invocation. Each song has layers. A melody for the living, another for the ancestors, and sometimes one just for the gods. You close your eyes and the landscape shifts. You can almost see it. A gathering hundreds of years ago, with elders seated in circles, listening as someone plays the same tune on an older bira. The sounds have changed, yes. The fingers are new, but the story is the same. You open your eyes again, and the stone walls are still watching. You rise gently, thank the players with a quiet nod, and continue walking. Now you're tracing the outer boundary of the city, where low terraces run along the slope. They're not just leftover walls. They were once gardens, farms, walkways. People lived here, tended vegetables, raised chickens, fetched water. Some of these terraces even caught rainwater during storms, an early form of land management. Smart, sustainable, completely overlooked by early archaeologists, who were too busy searching for golden thrones. You find a smooth stone bench near the edge of one of these terraces and sit. The view stretches far, hills, brushland, clusters of trees. And just there, if you squint, you can see a worn footpath winding through the undergrowth. Probably the same one travelers used when approaching the city from the southeast. You imagine the first glimpse of the tower in the distance, shimmering in the afternoon heat, promising shelter, trade, maybe even a new start. Then you notice something tucked into the corner of the terrace wall. A stone bowl, half buried, filled with rainwater from the last storm. Algae clings to its inner rim. A bee lands delicately on the surface. You lean closer. A small frog blinks at you, as if to say, "This was mine first." Fair enough. You back away respectfully. This place is still in use, just not always by humans. You pass more signs of quiet continuity. Bundles of herbs drying on a line strung between two stones. A goat's skull perched carefully on a ledge. The faint outline of a footpath freshly swept clean. Great Zimbabwe hasn't been frozen in time. It has adapted. It breathes, not like a monument, but like a grandmother. Firm, wise, occasionally sharp, always watching. You walk the final few meters back toward the great enclosure as the last of the sun slips below the edge of the sky. The bira notes still hang in the air, even though the players are long gone. You rest your palm on the wall again. Not for luck, not for answers, just to say, "I was here." And in that moment, you feel something warm and still settle in your chest. Not awe, not reverence, just belonging. You're not sure how long you've been sitting there, hand resting on the stone, heart humming with the afterglow of bira music and dusty sunlight, but it's fully evening now. The shadows are deep, almost blue. The stones have cooled, and the city has entered its quietest mode yet. You start walking again, this time toward the outer edges of the site where the formal enclosures thin out and give way to open land. And here, where the city ends and the bush begins, you find something unexpected. A patch of strange, smooth stones embedded in the ground, arranged like a wide platform. At first glance, they look like paving. But then you notice the shape of rounded edges, faint concentric lines. Soundstones. They're real. You crouch and tap one lightly with your knuckles. It rings. Not a musical note exactly, but a low, resonant thrum that travels into your wrist and down your spine. You try another. This one sings back with a higher pitch. Someone placed these here on purpose. Not randomly. Not recently. Historians still argue whether this part of the site was meant for music or ceremony. The stones seem too perfectly arranged to be accidental, yet no one really knows what they were for. Acoustical testing suggests they were selected specifically for their ability to resonate. Some say it was a kind of natural drum. Others think it was a ritual signal to the ancestors. One fringe theory suggests they were early geological sensors, which feels a bit ambitious, but hey, the ancients were clever. You sit cross-legged and try striking a pattern, light taps with your fingertips. 1, 2, pause, 3. It's not melodic. It's atmospheric, like echoing into water. You close your eyes and keep tapping. The sounds layer gently like footsteps in mist. You imagine them once accompanied chants or dances or calls to gather. Maybe a child discovered it first, maybe someone stumbled on the sound while playing, and a whole ritual was built around that happy accident. The city isn't just built with stone. It's spoken in stone. And sometimes it sings. Eventually you stop. The vibrations linger longer than you expect. Even after you rise, your palms buzz softly as if they're remembering a song you never learned. You continue along the slope and reach a low platform near the site's edge where a single baobab tree leans slightly westward like it's bowing to the sun. There, on a small ledge, someone has placed a carved stone figure. Not a bird. A human. Or at least humanoid. Big head. Thin arms. Blank expression. You sit beside it. No plaque. No explanation. Just presence. You remember reading that such figures as the Kwambo were sometimes placed at thresholds or shrines. They weren't worshipped. They were witnesses. This one's seen a lot. You watch as the sky shifts from blue to lavender to that dusty orange-pink that never quite lasts. The light here is different. It doesn't just illuminate, it layers the world. Makes the ruins look younger. Softer. You think of the people who watched these same sunsets hundreds of years ago. Did they argue over dinner? Did they gossip about their neighbors' goats? Did they sit here with a cup of fermented sorghum beer and say, "That stone tower's leaning, right?" Did they laugh? Were they bored? Did they have that same bittersweet feeling at the end of a long day? You don't know. But your body does. You feel it in your shoulders. Your breath. That slow exhale you didn't realize you'd been holding. That grounded warmth in your chest that has nothing to do with history and everything to do with being here. You glance up. The stars are starting to arrive, early guests at a quiet party. Venus is already there, bold and alone. The sky still holds a bit of warmth near the horizon, but the first few deep blues are creeping in. Behind you, the stones glow faintly. Not magically, just patiently. Like they've seen this thousands of times and never gotten bored. You stand and walk toward the tree line where the wild brush begins. You're not leaving yet, but you're on the edge. The edge of the sight. The edge of time. The edge of something bigger. The wind shifts. You hear a faint whistle, not sharp, not deliberate. Just air moving through cracks. It sounds like a voice that got lost and became weather. And then suddenly you realize you're not alone. A small group of people are standing in a clearing nearby. Not tourists. Locals. Dressed in simple clothes, holding bundles of herbs and bowls of water. A quiet ceremony. No music. Just murmured voices. Smoke curls from a clay burner. You stay back. Not intruding, but watching. One woman raises her hand and releases a handful of dried petals into the wind. Another pours a stream of water onto the ground. A boy lights a small flame and places it in a hollowed-out gourd. You don't know what it means. You don't need to. This city isn't a relic. It's a place where time folds in on itself, where memory, motion, and meaning overlap like shadows at twilight. And somehow, even without understanding, you feel included. Not because you belong to the past, but because the past never left. It just kept whispering. And tonight, you finally heard it. The ceremony fades into silence behind you. Not an abrupt stop, just a gradual dissolving of movement, like sugar melting into warm tea. You turn away respectfully, continuing your slow walk along the city's boundary where the structured stone gives way to soft earth, where history's voice becomes a murmur rather than a monument. You trail your fingers along a low wall that curves inward, half swallowed by grass. It was probably part of a living compound once, one of hundreds. There's no sign to tell you who lived here. No record. Just the faint suggestion of space where breath once lived, laughter once sparked, and meals once simmered. And then, something catches your eye. A scatter of polished stones. Not naturally polished. Hand-shaped. Shiny with use. Maybe playing pieces. Maybe counting tokens. Maybe nothing at all. But someone once touched each of them over and over, for a purpose lost to everyone but the stones. You sit again. At this point, you're starting to think this entire city was designed to make people sit and think. In the distance, you hear a faint rhythm, wooden tapping. Not music. Tools. You rise and follow the sound until you find a young man shaping wooden bowls near the base of a tree. He's quiet, focused, and barely glances up when you approach. You watch him work. The tools are modern, but the rhythm feels older than language. Eventually, he speaks. My grandfather carved with stone. My father switched to wood. I use both. You nod, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. I'm making a bowl for weddings, he adds. When a family shares food from the same bowl, the marriage has better luck. You smile because you know that's true in more ways than one. He gestures behind him, to a small lean-to shelter where other bowls, spoons, and tiny carved soapstone birds are arranged on a mat. Not for sale, for ceremony. You don't touch anything, but you take it in, one of the quiet legacies still flowing out of these ruins. Historians still argue whether Great Zimbabwe's influence was local or regional. Some claim it shaped culture far into Mozambique and Botswana. Others insist its power was mostly symbolic. But here, sitting in the shade of a tree, listening to a descendant carve his family's story into wood, it doesn't feel like influence. It feels like continuity. You walk away slowly, deeper into the twilight. The sky has shifted into full dusk. That soft violet wash that makes even rocks look like dreams. Bats flicker overhead. The goats are quiet for once. The world's volume has dropped a few decibels. You feel your own heartbeat settling into rhythm with the air. And then you stumble across it. A set of flat stones arranged in a circle. Deliberate, intimate, possibly a family shrine, or a council space, or a place to rest. One of the stones has faint grooves on it, shaped almost like a handprint. You press yours into it. It doesn't fit exactly, but it doesn't have to. You lie back, this time without hesitation, and let your body stretch into the ground. The dust doesn't cling, it cushions. The silence doesn't press, it welcomes. Above you, the stars have fully arrived. Orion's belt, the Southern Cross, scattered constellations you can't name but recognize in your bones. A cool breeze drifts across your face, and with it, a memory you didn't know you had. That silence doesn't mean absence. That ruins don't mean endings. That places like this aren't forgotten. They're just waiting for you to listen, to sit, to breathe, to remember. You think of all the hands that built this city. Not just kings and stonemasons, but potters, sweepers, shepherds, children with sharp eyes and sharper ears. People who knew how to watch the land, who knew that stories grow better in quiet soil. You close your eyes, and in that breathless stillness, you hear something again. Not music, not wind, but movement. Inside the stone, inside the dust, inside you. You're not just hearing a city, you're being folded into it, one breath at a time. You don't rise immediately. The earth is comfortable now, molded to the curve of your spine like it's known you longer than you've known yourself. The stars above are sharp, countless, and oddly close, like someone poked holes in the sky and forgot to sew them back up. The breeze brushes your ear again, but you're not cold. Not anymore. Eventually, you sit up, and when you do, you realize something has changed. It's not the place, it's you. You know this path now, not just where it goes, but how it feels. The weight of the air, the smell of old granite, the particular crunch of dry grass underfoot. You're no longer visiting Great Zimbabwe. You're part of its rhythm. And tonight, that rhythm leads you back towards something you've seen dozens of times but never truly approached. An informational board near the entrance gate. One of those standard UNESCO plaques. Neat typeface, worn metal, a little faded from sun and time. But this time, you actually read it. Great Zimbabwe, World Heritage Site, recognized for its cultural significance, architectural achievement, and historic value as a symbol of African civilization and identity. It's a tidy summary, accurate, respectful, necessary, but it doesn't even come close. You glance up from the plaque and see a woman sweeping the stone path just beyond it. She moves slowly, precisely, her broom made of bundled reeds. You've passed her before, early in the morning, late in the afternoon, always sweeping. She doesn't pause, doesn't look up, just sweeps the path as if it needs to be reminded where to begin. You walk toward her quietly and ask if she minds you watching. She smiles. It's not for the tourists, she says. It's for the ancestors. Then she chuckles. But the tourists help keep it clean, too. You nod. Somehow, that explains everything. She keeps sweeping. The rhythmic shhh of straw against stone is the softest sound you've heard all day, and somehow the most powerful. It's a kind of music, a kind of prayer, a way of saying this is still ours. And it is. You think again of how long it took for that truth to be acknowledged. It wasn't until 1980 that Zimbabwe gained independence. Until then, the myths about Great Zimbabwe persisted, built by outsiders, claimed by colonizers, misunderstood by those who refused to believe greatness could come from the soil of Africa itself. It took decades of scholarship, protest, and pride to unlearn that narrative. And when the newly liberated nation needed a name, it didn't invent one. It returned to this place, this story, these stones. Zimbabwe. You walk a little farther and find a low platform ringed with torches, unlit but clearly used during ceremonies. One of them is carved with the words Zimba Zamabwe, houses of stone, the phrase that possibly gave the entire city, and later the country, its name. It's not flashy. It doesn't need to be, because the stones don't just stand. They mean. You crouch and touch one of the torch stands, now cold from the night air. And then you look up at the great enclosure one last time. No spotlight, no filters, just shape, shadow, story. You remember the soapstone birds, the grain tower, the games scratched into dust, the quiet Bira melody that still hums somewhere in your memory, the breeze that carried petals and smoke into a sky that always listened. And you realize, Great Zimbabwe doesn't ask to be understood. It asks to be felt. You rise. Behind you, the sweeping continues. In front of you, the stars stretch wide. You walk back toward the entrance, your footsteps slow, deliberate, almost reluctant. Not because you don't want to leave, but because something in you knows you won't. Not entirely. Places like this don't release you. They echo inside you, quietly, permanently, like a song with no final note. The air has gone cool now, cool enough that you pull your blanket tighter as you move through the last of the winding paths. The ground beneath your feet is firmer, more compacted here. You've circled back toward the newer walkways, where the old meets the gently modern, wooden handrails, interpretive signs, a small reception hut with a tin roof that rattles quietly in the breeze. But even here, the city holds its weight. The stillness hasn't broken. It's just settled into a different form. You stop near a bench just outside the outermost curve of the ruins. The stones are behind you now, but the presence remains. You feel it in your chest, not heavy, just anchored. You're not alone. Ahead, a group of school children are being led across a gravel path by a teacher in a red shawl. They're not quiet, not by any stretch, but their energy doesn't disturb the place. It adds to it. Their footsteps bounce, their questions fly. Was the bird magic? Could you hide in the tower? Why didn't they have bathrooms? You grin. All valid questions. The teacher answers each one patiently. She gestures toward the hill, traces a circle in the dirt with her toe, and tells them that greatness isn't always loud. That sometimes it looks like stone stacked so carefully it stays up forever. That sometimes history whispers so softly you have to close your eyes to hear it. And they listen. You wonder how many generations of children have walked these paths. How many feet have worn down the earth? How many grandmothers have pointed at the tower and said, your great-great-great was born right over there? How many names the stones have heard? How many they've kept? You walk on past the tiny visitor kiosk where someone's written on the chalkboard, welcome. Ask gently. Listen harder. Not bad advice. You loop around the path and find yourself near a row of trees planted deliberately. Not ancient. Not ornamental. Just useful. Shade trees. Probably fruit-bearing. It's a small part of the reforestation efforts around the site, an effort to protect the land, to restore what earlier generations took without asking. You see a sign half tucked behind a sapling. Regeneration is remembering. Let the land breathe again. You touch one of the branches as you pass. Its leaves shiver just slightly. This place isn't frozen in the past. It's growing back toward the future. You follow the trail that winds toward the local artist's stalls. No neon signs. No hard selling. Just quiet rows of carved goods, woven baskets, clay pots, and yes, more birds. Each one a little different. One has exaggerated wings. Another a spiral base. One is barely more than a smooth pebble with a beak. You lift it gently and feel its weight. The artist, an older man with fingers stained from dye, nods at you. It watches, he says simply. You ask him if he's always lived near here. No, he says. But my spirit has. And somehow that makes sense. He gestures to a stool. You sit. He offers you a calabash of sour sorghum beer, thick, frothy, oddly comforting. You take a sip, your face puckering only a little. He laughs. First time's always a surprise. He tells you that the stone walls hum differently in the rain. That the frogs at the northern edge croak louder after a good ceremony. That sometimes, if you sleep too close to the hill complex, you dream in voices that aren't yours. And that's when you realize something. Great Zimbabwe is not just an archaeological site. It's a language. Not one you can learn through grammar or textbooks, but through presence. Through repetition. Through listening to wind, water, footsteps, and the spaces between stories. The artist places the bird in your palm. Take it, he says. If it wants to stay with you, it will. You thank him and tuck it carefully into your bag. You walk slowly back toward the edge of the site, passing the final curve of wall where the stones start thinning again, returning to soil. The stars above are fully awake now. Crisp. Watching. And so is the city. Always. It doesn't need you to understand every symbol, every spiral, every forgotten name. It only asks you to feel them. To know they mattered. To carry them forward. You stop once more before crossing the final marker. You turn, facing the ruins now bathed in silver starlight. And you whisper, not for drama, not for anyone else, just for the stone. I see you. The wind answers by rustling the grass. Then quiet again. Perfect. You take your final steps slowly, deliberately, like someone walking back through a dream they're not ready to wake from. The official boundary marker for the site is just ahead, a pair of wooden posts connected by rope, more symbolic than anything. There's no gate. No alarm. Just the gentle understanding that beyond this point, you're stepping out of something sacred. But you hesitate, because leaving Great Zimbabwe doesn't feel like exiting a place. It feels like leaving behind a conversation that was only just beginning. So you turn around one last time. The moon is up now. High. Full. Casting pale light across the terraces, the walls, the tower. Everything glows silver and blue. It's quiet, but not empty. The whole site seems to hold its breath, watching to see if you'll say goodbye or just fade. You take a step back toward the edge of the terrace and sit down. Let your body settle. Let the silence stretch. And then, softly, you begin to notice it again, the heartbeat of this place. Not a sound. Not a drum. Just the rhythm of everything being here. A breeze tugging at the leaves. The scrape of a lizard's claws over stone. The deep hush of distant trees adjusting in the dark. This is a city that continues even when you're not looking. A city that has been many things to many people. Royal court, trade hub, home, myth, controversy, symbol, silence. Historians still argue what Great Zimbabwe means. Was it more political or spiritual? Did it hold vast influence, or was it just one jewel among many in a wider landscape of African city-states? And the truth is, maybe it was all those things. Or maybe, like any great place, it was too large to ever be one thing. You lie back in the grass, arms folded under your head, and look up. The stars have taken over the entire sky now. So many. So bright. You imagine what this looked like centuries ago, exactly the same. A Shona stargazer standing on the same slope, naming constellations not in Latin but in rhythm and metaphor. Maybe they looked up and thought, we are the stars come down to live in stone. And maybe they were right. After all, the walls here don't just enclose. They reflect. They absorb memory and feed it back slowly. Every handprint, every drumbeat, every whispered prayer. Still inside them. Still present. Still listening. A cool gust rolls over the slope. You feel the night deepen, its edges softening, the city curling inward, the stones relaxing their watch. It's time. You rise, stretch, and begin walking again, this time for real. You pass under the wooden marker, back onto the gravel path, back into the world that isn't quite ancient, but isn't quite new either. The small visitor hut is quiet. The lights are off. The broom rests neatly by the doorway, waiting for morning. You follow the trail until the ruins are no longer visible behind you. But you don't feel like they're gone. You feel carried. Because the story of Great Zimbabwe didn't end. It dispersed. And now you're carrying a small piece of it. Not in your bag. Not in your notes. But somewhere behind your ribs where memory settles and dreams begin. You stop just before the road. Take one last breath. And whisper the word, not like a tourist, but like someone who understands. Zimbabwe. House of Stone. And now. Let the night fall fully now. There's nothing left to do, nothing left to find. Just stillness. Let your breath grow slow. Let your hands rest, fingers still remembering the weight of carved birds and the warmth of old stone. Let your body soften into the surface beneath you. Let your thoughts drift like leaves on a calm river. Let them pass, gold beads and dust, the sound of a thumb piano, a soapstone eye watching from centuries away. There's no need to make sense of it now. This is a place that lived and loved and labored in silence. And tonight, it lets you rest within that silence. You are not a visitor anymore. You are a listener, a sleeper, a quiet echo. And so, close your eyes gently. Let the stars above the ruined tower watch over you. Let the breeze carry the scent of old rain and long-vanished cooking fires. Let the earth rise up beneath you like a memory. And let sleep come slowly. Not as an ending, but as another way of remembering. Good night, traveler of stone. Good night, child of the quiet. Good night, Great Zimbabwe.